I really wanted to have something else to upload for my 4th anniversary on YouTube, but I just don't have anything else finished yet. Though I am working on a new top 5 list, so keep your eyes open for that. Anyways, I just recently finished Skyward Sword, and I don't plan to do a review of it, at least not for a long time. But since I keep getting asked about it, I'll just tell you what I liked about it and what I didn't like about it. There are a lot of things I want to talk about, but they almost all involve spoilers, so I won't talk about them here. As I said though, I'm talking about what I liked and what I didn't like, so I'm not going to say anything else such as how do I feel about this game overall, or what kind of recommendation I can give it. Also, I feel I need to say that these are just my opinions, and the experiences I've had with the game will most likely be a lot more different than yours. So with that said, I'll just start with what I liked. For the most part, the dungeons in the game are some of the best we've ever had, which is saying quite a lot since this is what Zelda games are mostly known for. I'd say my favorites so far are the Fire Sanctuary, Earth Temple, and while I thought I would hate the final dungeon, I actually turned out to be rather impressed by it. Why? You'll have to look that one up. No spoilers here. The bosses in this game are outstanding, and finally bring the sense of epicness that previous Zelda bosses have been missing back. My personal favorites being the 4th and 5th dungeon bosses. Even better is that there are some bosses that aren't even in a dungeon, so it comes as a nice surprise. Using the motion controls on the items works just fine with the exception of one, but I'll get to that later. Even if the controls start to go a little haywire, you can just press down on the D-pad to get them back in order. Most Zelda games have very memorable characters in both good and bad ways. This game is no different, but you may start to grow attached to some of them. I won't say which ones, but just know that your first impression of them might not be the same as the ones you end up with. I actually like the stamina meter, as that would actually let me run to places, and there's plenty of stamina fruits scattered around to let me keep running. Finally, the beacons on the map are very helpful in showing you where you need to go if you get lost. Alright, now I'll move on to what I didn't like about the game. This is where I'm going to be hit by all the Zelda fans, but that's the price to pay for speaking my mind. First of all, while the dungeons and places are very well put together, I felt that there were some places that were poorly done. There's 3 places that really caused me some frustration because the puzzles were out of sight, which in Zelda games have never really done that. In the first dungeon, there was a room where you had to hit the switch in order to open a door. A little cliched, but the switch was hidden in a corner near the entrance of the room I just walked into, and completely out of the player's line of sight. Another one, and this is the one that makes me want to punch some of the designers in the face, was when you had to find the 5 pieces of a key to open up the second dungeon, you would come across an area where Link's clothes could catch on fire, and you would die. So naturally you think you have to get out of there pretty quickly, but going straight up, which was the only direction I could see from the entrance, was not the right way, and I died. So naturally I thought I should stay away from that area, but as it turns out, you're supposed to go right from the entrance, but because it's out of my sight, I couldn't see it. I hated that design with great intensity! The other one was the final dungeon with the time orb, and once again, a puzzle too far out of reach to actually see clearly. This next one, truly based on a personal experience, and everyone has theirs. While the motion controls for the items work great, the sword combat is a different story. Most of the time it worked, but sometimes it doesn't, and I'm not too sure how to recalibrate it. There were times I needed to make a skyward strike, and even though I have the controller over my head pointed up, Link couldn't get his sword over his head. Not to mention that there were times I made a horizontal slash, and it read it as a diagonal slash, causing me to miss the area I needed to hit. Or if I attacked and it was blocked, and trying to quickly hit from another angle, it would make the same attack again! I'm not sure what the problem is, but the sword combat became a love-hate sort of thing with me. Oh boy, the fans will never let me hear the end of this one. But I found more than half of the soundtrack to be forgettable. Yes, it's fully orchestrated, but what's the point if the tunes aren't that memorable? The only ones I remember are the theme of the game, flying around Skyloft, and the bosses. And while we finally get a Zelda game where the dungeon music doesn't suck, I just can't remember any of them. Previous Zelda games, I could retain about 75 to 90% of the soundtrack. Here, it's about 40%, and I did find that disappointing. Going back to flying around, it's boring. There's almost nothing to do and so very few places to actually go to. Sailing around in Wind Waker was better as there were enemies and treasures and giant Octoroks and tons of islands to explore. Here, there's virtually nothing. The small rocks have very little to explore on them, and trying to fight any of the rare sky enemies feel like a waste of time as it's very hard to defend yourself. And while there are some speed boosts out there, your Loftwing just feels very slow, even with its dash move that is limited to 3 times until you let it recharge. And going back to exploration, there's very little in the overall game. Added to the game were treasures that would enhance your items or bugs that would give your potions extra effects. I barely used any of them. The few enhancements I made had very little effect on the actual item, and you can beat the game without ever needing to do this. The bugs? Meh. I always just stuck with the fairies. The only potion I ever used was the Revitalize potion that recovers 4 hearts and repairs your shield, as it can now take damage and break unless you get the Hyrulean shield, which doesn't even show up until the near end of the game and you have to win it. Of course, your shields only take damage if you fail to do the shield bash correctly, but I felt the game never properly trained you on how to do that. There was an area you could train with it, but it never really taught you the advantages of how to use it. Or if it did, it just went completely over my head. While I didn't encounter this because I got my game late and avoided this with all the warnings that most people reported on it, I still can't believe Nintendo did not catch that game-breaking bug that comes near the end of the game. Near the end, you have to learn a song, and you have to get 3 parts before you learn the final one. If you get the one in Lanayru Gorge, the desert area, first, and or talk to the Goron there twice or something, I'm not entirely sure, then the game won't activate the sequences you need to do in order to finish the game. While you could send your SD card with the memory of the game to Nintendo to fix it, or download the channel to do the same thing, this never should have happened in the first place. How did their game testers not catch something this important? They even had plenty of time to go through the game again, catch it, fix it, and sell it without us ever knowing about it. And this was one of the most expensive games Nintendo ever made, so what happened here? There is almost no excuse for this. Last is something I'm sure most players can agree on. Fi is by far one of the worst Zelda sidekicks this series has ever seen. I can understand why people think Navi is annoying, but she at least does the lock-on targeting thing and gives good advice. Fi has almost no personality and basically knows nothing more than what you, the player, already know. Every time you ask for her help, you'll see these options. Something obvious, something pointless, something useless, or tell me to shut up, master. Every time I asked for her help, I did a facepalm, not because of her inability to actually help me, but because I should have known better than to ask her for help in the first place. This is all I'm going to say about the game for now. I'm not going to say how exactly I feel about it, or what kind of recommendation I would give it, or anything else. There's a lot more I could say, but a lot of the other stuff would just spoil the game, and I don't want to spoil that much of the game, or if I spoiled any of it at all. I don't think I did. There's a great deal of stuff I could talk about with this game, and go into a lot more detail, but right now I just don't have the time. Maybe when I go back to review the other Zelda console games, I'll end up reviewing this one as well. You never know.